On the day my sister-in-law fell in love, she was opposed by the whole family. They all said that the man was not a good match. Only I stood by her side to support her and let her recognize her heart. I told her that there is nothing wrong with loving someone. Later, when she was sent to a mental hospital, I stood outside the hospital gate, looking at the disintegrated Joe family, and laughed so crazy that when Joe Fushing called, I was picking up fresh lilies in the flower shop. He rarely called me. I usually send messages when I have something to do. Unless it's something urgent, I casually put the flower branches I picked next to the vase and answered the phone. Husband, Joe Fushing's impatient voice came from the other side. Where are you? It's so late. Did you just answer the phone? I pursed my lips and apologized subconsciously. I'm sorry, I didn't mean not to answer the phone. I was at the flower shop. Joe Fushing didn't have time to listen to my explanation of a bunch of nonsense, and interrupted me with a cold voice. Meng Huan had a quarrel with her family and locked herself in the room. Come back quickly to persuade her. After telling his story, he hung up the phone without giving me a chance to answer. This is his usual temperament. He only puts forward his demands on the phone. As for whether I can do it, it is not within his consideration. Meng Huan is Joe Fushing's biological sister, but she is more willing to be close to me than her brother. Every time she was angry, I was always there to comfort and advise her. So this time, when she quarreled with her family, Joe Fushing thought of me immediately, as if he was sure that I would come back to comfort Joe Meng Huan, just as they believed that I was in love with Joe Fushing. The roots are planted deeply, and I have no regrets. The flower branch I placed casually just now was knocked to the ground. The lily that was originally in full bloom was a little wilted at the petals due to the impact. I knelt down to pick it up, walked to the front desk and handed it to the flower shop owner. Trouble. Wrap it up for me. Everyone who comes to the flower shop is looking for the bunch of flowers that are in full bloom. Very few people will buy a bunch of wilted flowers and go back. The boss looked at me strangely, but since someone is responsible for the damaged flower branches, there was no need to talk anymore. I took the flower branches and packaged them carefully. I took the lilies packaged by the boss and slowly admired the other blooming flower branches in the flower shop. Then I walked out of the door without any haste. I wasn't as cautious as I was to Joe Fushing on the phone just now. When I returned to his house, Joe Fushing was pacing back and forth in the living room, his brows furrowed and his air pressure gloomy. He had been impatient for a long time. When he saw that I was late, he rushed over angrily. Why are you so slow to come back? I lowered my head, twirled my fingers, and lowered my eyebrows at him to admit my mistake. I'm sorry, husband, I didn't mean to do it. Meng Huan likes Lily, and I thought that if I bring Lily back, she will be in a better mood. Joe Fushing's accusing words stuck in his mouth, and in the end he could only push me impatiently. Meng Huan has been refusing to open the door. Please go and have a look. He always ignored my emotions, but for the only one my sister still cares about it. It concerns Joe Meng Huan. He is willing to give me some tolerance. Standing at Joe Meng Huan's door, I took care of Lily, who was getting weaker and weaker due to the exposure all the way. Then I knocked on the door. My voice was full of concern and urgency. Meng Huan, it's me, can you please open the door? The door was opened from the inside, and when Joe Meng Huan saw it was me, the corners of her mouth twitched, and she hugged me and started crying aggrievedly. Sister-in-law, she couldn't stop crying. I had no choice but to push her away first, carefully wipe the tears on her face, and ask softly, what's wrong? Wasn't it fine yesterday? Did your brother make you angry again? He's like this, straight man. Sister, I definitely didn't mean to offend you. This is what I always say. There are so many bad blood between brothers and sisters. If I really mentioned Joe Fushing's fault, Joe Meng Huan would probably be the first person to fall out with me for so long. I have figured out Joe Meng Huan's thoughts a long time ago. Stupid, but not too naive. She knew that the Joe family was her support and Joe Fushing was her backer. But this time, I didn't guess what Joe Meng Huan was thinking. After hearing my excuse for Joe Fushing, she immediately pushed me away. His eyes were full of complaints against Joe Fushing. He did it on purpose. He just doesn't like me. If he hadn't instigated it, how could my parents have forced me to break up with Qingjing? I know Lu Qingjing is Zhou Minghuang's in. I originally thought she was just playing around with him when she was young, but now it seems that she is obviously obsessed with Lu Qingjing. No wonder Joe Fushing is so angry. Some people think that their sister is a low-class person with no background. Based on Joe Fushing's personality, she naturally determined that the person was plotting against Zhou Menghuan, who wanted to pull the Zhou family to climb up. As for Zhou Menghuan, she was too naive and pampered by the Zhou family, and lived in her own world. She determined that Lu Qingjing was her true love. Then those who try to break her up are evil people who cannot see the care of her family. She only feels that she has been wronged and is stupid without knowing it. But Zhou Fusheng doesn't know that blindly suppressing her will only arouse Zhou Menghuan's rebellious psychology. Originally, it was 5 points. Because of these obstacles, love will turn into 8 points. The more something is not available, the more obsessed it will be. Just like the Zhou family now opposes Zhou Menghuan and Lu Qingjing being together, the more Zhou Menghuan will believe Lu Qingjing is her true love. There is nothing she can do about it. A spoiled child always has a willful streak. But what does this have to do with me? The more chaotic the Zhou family is, the happier I am. I put down the bouquet and walked up to her. Do you really like him so much? Zhou Menghuan nodded hurriedly. I like it. This is the first time in my life that I like someone so much. When she mentioned him, Zhou Menghuan seemed to have changed. Her usual willfulness and arrogance were put aside. Her eyebrows were crooked, and she could not hide her admiration when talking about her lover. She was as vicious as a little girl immersed in love, and she was also a very vicious person. Will be immersed in the sweetness of love. The hands that have killed people in the past also dream of happiness. Why should she? Sister-in-law, you know, he is really special. Ever since I was little, everyone around me has told me what I should do and what I shouldn't do. He is the only one who doesn't. He will ask me if I like doing this. Sister-in-law, I know my brother is worried about me, but I am no longer a child. I can tell who is good to me and who is bad to me. I lowered my eyes and smiled. Can you really tell the difference? Such a small favor makes you think you have met true love. The darkness of the Zhou family all these years is really in vain. I raised my eyes and looked at the lily that filled the room with fragrance. Have they grown up? Under the mask are jackals, tigers and leopards. She is still a monster, you must see clearly. When he went downstairs, Zhou Fusheng was still waiting in the living room. How is Menghuan? He was worried about his sister, but he refused to communicate well because of his awkward temperament. The situation became more and more stalemate, and each time I was to coordinate and let them vent to each other. This gave me, an outsider, an opportunity to sneak in, but no one noticed that I have done a lot of things that have crossed the line in my current identity. I replied, but asked almost pleadingly, are you really not allowed to let Menghuan be with him? What nonsense are you talking about? Zhou Fusheng interrupted me sharply. You can't see clearly. Even if Menghuan can't see clearly, well, what do you like? That person is the money behind to Menghuan. I lowered my head and retorted a little aggrievedly, when I see Menghuan, I seem to see myself who once clumsily chased you. I don't want to make her sad. Zhou Fusheng hearing this, he stared at me gloomily. Menghuan is different from you. Of course I understood what Zhou Fusheng meant. Zhou Menghuan is a superior young lady from the Zhou family, and I am just a poor girl clinging to him. Of course, there is no relationship between us. They cannot be compared. My love should be so humble, and her love should be a match. Zhou Fusheng and I are not from the same family. Logically speaking, it is impossible for me to marry him, but I can't help but Zhou Menghuan likes me, and even the Zhou family elders like me. And because I have no temper, I obey Zhou Fusheng in everything. So when Zhou Menghuan proposed to marry me to her brother, they turned a blind eye. As for Zhou Fusheng, it doesn't matter who his wife is. Anyway, outside, his woman has never stopped marrying me home. Not only can he have one more person to take care of her sister, but also he can make house elders no longer care about his romantic affairs outside. He naturally has no reason to refuse. You see, they have all planned the use of me after marrying Joe Fushing, but no one has ever asked me, why did I marry Joe Fushing? Of course, it's because he has a bad temper and acts impulsively, because he doesn't have me in his heart, and he beats and scolds this Joe family at every turn. If there is anyone in the Joe family who treats me as a human being, it's Joe Menghuan, although she often uses me to escape her brother's punishment, but at least she won't follow the example of her brother who ignores my existence, cheats on her in marriage, and lets her mistresses show off their power in front of me. Joe Menghuan gave me Lu Qingjing's address. When she wanted Lu Qingjing to take her there, Lu Qingjing didn't do anything. It's not surprising, and I'm not surprised to see him. After all, I personally selected this person for Joe Menghuan. But right now, I still have to act like I'm negotiating with him. I know what you mean. You want me to leave Menghuan. Huan, let me tell you, I really love Menghuan, and you can't insult her by giving me money. You keep thinking about Menghuan, but have you really asked Menghuan what she wants? Those disgusted eyes. It seems that I am the ruthless queen mother who is about to break up their love. This couple's acting skills are very good. They are indeed the ones I chose and they have not let me down. You misunderstood. I don't have a check to give you. Of course, if you are willing, I can go back and prepare it. Now I want to talk to you calmly. I know you love Menghuan, but it is because you love her that you should think about her more. I am not denying your talent, but the fact is that you have nothing now. How can you give Menghuan a stable life? What about the future? In the future, you may be radiant and famous, but now it's too early to say it. These words were the words I had thought of before. When I gave the recording to Joe Menghuan, she was angry as expected. Sister-in-law, you said you were on my side. Why did you look down on him as much as your brother? I clearly thought about her every word, but she only heard that I told Lu Qingjing to leave her. Even if it was stupid, I was so stupid. I don't blame Joe Fushing for worrying about it. I picked up the lilies she threw on the ground, silently inserted them back into the original vase, and carefully changed the water for the flowers. Menghuan, I am on your side. I hope you are happy more than anyone else, but before that, I have to make sure that the person you like can afford your love, and can he support you? I am your sister-in-law, and I will never harm you. Joe Menghuan didn't listen to a word of what I thought was deep thought. She stared at me fiercely. The resentment in her eyes was like a burning flame, overwhelming me. You are so hypocritical. You are just like my brother. You clearly don't want to see me. Okay, I shouldn't have helped you before. People like you are not worthy of being my sister-in-law. When I was kicked out of the room by Joe Menghuan, I even had time to think about what kind of person is worthy of being her sister-in-law. If I don't have any thoughts about myself, am I only worthy of being her puppet? Or should I put her first in everything and make everything suit her wishes? As for me, I certainly am not worthy of being her sister-in-law. The Joe family is a twisted and perverted sea of fire. If I didn't have no choice, who would she be willing to get in? And Joe Menghuan eloped. After she realized that no one in the family wanted to stand by her, she used the idea of running away to force the Joe family to compromise on Joe Menghuan's elopement. The Joe family was very angry, and Joe Fushing also, as expected. His anger was directed at me. I covered half of my swollen face, not daring to complain at all. Instead, I anxiously gave him advice. Since that Lu Qingjing is greedy for the money after Menghuan's death, why don't we talk to the outside world, declare that Menghuan has no inheritance rights, so Lu Qingjing can't get what he wants. So he will naturally stop entangled with Menghuan. Although Menghuan will be sad, it is better than if she was deceived. After hearing my suggestion, Joe Fushing narrowed his eyes. I squinted my eyes and began to think about the feasibility of this matter. When I saw this, I silently retreated to my seat and continued to be the dull and clumsy love brain in his eyes. His wife Joe Fushing acted quickly and asked Zhao's father to change the asset certificate the next day and later ownership, and took photos and sent them to Joe Menghuan. The threat was self-evident. Jo Menghuan was almost furious when she saw the news, but her awe of Zhou Fusheng was deep-rooted. She did not dare to lose her temper with Zhou Fusheng, so she immediately, "He called me. You see, when the persimmon is soft, everyone wants to come up and pinch it, be it Zhou Fusheng or Jo Menghuan. If I obey them obediently, they won't mind being nice to me, just like they would treat an outside dog. That's a little kindness, but if I disobey, it's my fault. How can a dog have its own temper? Of course, it can do whatever the owner says. What does Zhou Fusheng mean? Why should he ask his parents to give away all the family property? Give it to him. I am also the daughter of the Zhou family. Tell him that I will never agree to the division of property." Jo Menghuan's voice was too loud, so I took the phone further away to avoid poisoning my ears. After she finished venting, I pretending to be concerned about her sister, she carefully comforted her. "Menghuan, don't be angry. In fact, my parents' original intention was to see if Lu Qingjing was after your money or your people. All the family property was given to your brother just for outsiders to see, an illusion, just to test Lu Qingjing. If he still treats you as always, your parents will naturally no longer doubt him. Lu Qingjing is Jo Menghuan's opposite. She cannot tolerate others not trusting him, let alone others questioned him, even if they were doing it for her own good." Of course, the call ended on an unhappy note and I hung up. I went to Jo Menghuan's room and took out the bunch of lilies that had withered inside. Things that have been thrown into the trash can with nostalgia and have lost their value have no need to continue to exist. Jo Menghuan has been in the trap for too long. Her gentle methods have made her lose her vigilance. It's time to close the net. The Zhou family has done what they said. In addition to the Zhou family's property, they even cut off Jo Menghuan's financial supply. Growing up in such a greenhouse, every petal of the flower is carefully watered with money. The Zhou family is sure that without money, Jo Menghuan will come back obediently. Jo Menghuan called me and asked me to give her some money. She didn't want to bow to the Zhou family. As a favor, my sister-in-law is my sister-in-law. Naturally, I went through all my savings and gave all the money to Jo Menghuan. "I misunderstood you last time. I shouldn't have said that to you. I knew my sister-in-law was the best." After getting the money, she has regained her former coquettish and cute look, as if the dispute between us had never existed. Now that I think about it, the first time Jo Menghuan and I met, it seemed to foreshadow our future. She walked in front of her carefree, and I behind her. I silently protected her on a very ordinary evening. That day I got off work late, and on the way back, I met Jo Menghuan, who was being followed. Out of protection for the same sex, I called the police and followed her all the way. Faced with her gratitude afterward, I raised my glasses frames awkwardly and waved my hands helplessly. "No, it's okay." Originally, the Zhou family had doubted me. How come I happened to show up in such a remote place? It wasn't until the Zhou family found out that the person who followed Jo Menghuan that day was specially arranged by someone else to take the opportunity to save Jo Menghuan and take a ride on the Zhou family's ship. Then they dispelled their suspicions about me. It turned out that God had planned this incident. Instead of catching the person, a passerby, bumped into me by mistake. No one had cared about the truth about Jo Menghuan's surroundings for a long time. The Zhou family believed in the facts they found out. Naturally, I was just that person. The kind-hearted passers-by all said that I am lucky. Such an outrageous thing happened to me. I am lucky to win the favor of the Zhou family. Maybe, if I can destroy the Zhou family, then I will reluctantly believe in my luck. Well, because of this incident, Jo Menghuan and I gradually became familiar, until she found out that I had a crush on Zhou Fusheng, and pushed me towards Zhou Fusheng. Zhou Fusheng was gentle and polite to me in front of Jo Menghuan, but looked down upon me behind her back. And he decided that I was getting close to Jo Menghuan on purpose just to get close to him. No matter how I explained that it was just a coincidence, he didn't believe it. So, he didn't feel guilty at all about his cheating. He laughed at me for being so good after taking advantage of me, and said since I married him at all costs, I should be clear about the future path. I should bear it if he gets close to others, because this is the path I chose. Yes, I raised the corners of my mouth almost in pleasure. Joe Fusheng was right. Marrying him and getting close to Joe Menghuan were all planned by me early in the morning. Half a month later, Joe Menghuan came back. She came back alone. When she came, she was standing there alone. What happened to the Joe family? I have always seen my baby in such a miserable condition, and I felt so distressed. I pulled her to ask her for help. Everyone seemed to have lost their memory, forgetting that they were the ones who forced Joe Menghuan's money to force her away. As for the fact that she was abandoned by Lu Qingjing, everyone was even more concerned. It was tacitly mentioned, as if Joe Menghuan just went out to play, and everyone tacitly protected her self-esteem. I knew Joe Menghuan would come back for a long time, but I didn't expect it to be so soon. It seemed that the wind was blowing on Lu Qingjing's pillow. In time, after all, although the Zhou family cut off her money, the little savings I gave her before were enough for her and Lu Qingjing to maintain a luxurious life for more than half a year. Lu Qingjing told me that Zhou Menghuan had her own plans when she came back this time. Using the Zhou family to help Lu Qingjing, the Zhou family was immersed in the joy of their daughter recognizing the reality. No one noticed that Zhou Menghuan was a little uncomfortable. Of course, my blowing was indispensable to light the fire. While Lu Qingjing was blowing the pillow, I woke her up at the right time. Dad, the reason why Mum is so angry is because Lu Qingjing doesn't have a career of his own. If Lu Qingjing can start a career, and your parents love you so much, why are they really willing to stand in the way of your happiness, Menghuan? It's not that your parents don't love you. It is precisely because I love you so much that the authorities are confused. Your brother is watching the company, and your parents just hope that you can be carefree for the rest of your life, find someone who loves you, and be happy for the rest of your life. Lu Qingjing did not career, but the Zhou family has it. It is unrealistic for a large company to branch out into a small company for Lu Qingjing to manage, but Zhou Menghuan can build a studio of his own just for Lu Qingjing. As for the money to create a studio, my savings are naturally not enough, but the Zhou family is such a big company, what's wrong with moving some money to help him? As long as the post-production studio is running normally, it will be fine to fill this hole. So, Zhou Menghuan came back, and when she and Lu Qingjing were inseparable, she brought a lot of attention to the Zhou family. The Zhou family thought that it was ridiculous for Zhou Menghuan to return home alone because Lu Qingjing finally exposed his true face. After exposing her true face, she would at least have to wait until the perpetrator had no power to fight back before returning home. Zhou Menghuan asked to join the company. Although it was a bit strange, Zhao's father thought it was because this incident had made her grow up. Apart from being relieved, a suitable position was arranged for her in the company and professionals were hired to guide her. After learning about this situation, Zhou Fusheng looked confused. I can actually understand what Zhou Fusheng is thinking. In the past, when Zhou Menghuan was just waiting to die, he was the only pillar of the Zhou family. He was willing to indulge Zhou Menghuan in order to demonstrate his sense of responsibility. When others mentioned him, who would not praise the harmony between brother and sister? Now, the sister who relied on him wholeheartedly is going to join the company and has become a competitor with him. Can he continue to pamper this sister with the same mentality as before? I kept their reactions in mind with a cold eye, and laughed at them. It is indeed a pair of people who put interests first. Brother and sister, when there is no conflict, the love between brother and sister is deep. Once interests are involved, they are so fragile. But such conflict is not enough. They also need a fire to intensify their opposition. This fire, I want to help Zhou Menghuan sort out his old things. When Zhou Menghuan came back from the company, he saw the storage room door wide open, and I turned my back to her and was reading a letter. Sister-in-law, what are you doing? She was just asking, but I felt guilty for a while when she asked me. I looked above my head and on the ground but didn't dare to look at her. I didn't do anything. My parents said there are some old things piled up here. I thought about sorting them out, in case there are any. the useful things accidentally left in there. Jo Meng Huan knows me better, and seeing my reaction, he understood what I found in this room. She approached me, and I hurriedly hid the things in my hands behind. It's too chaotic here. Meng Huan, you go out first. There's nothing important. I'll go out with you. Sometimes, the more guilty a person is, the more inexplicable things he will say. This is the state I am in now. Jo Meng Huan, she yelled and pretended to walk out. When I was relieved, she suddenly came over and took away the paper I had hidden. What is this? I secretly read someone else's love letter, and was caught by the person involved. I blushed. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have peeked at someone else's love letter to you. I swear I thought it was just a random piece of paper. I never thought it was a love letter. Love letter? For me, Jo Meng Huan was suspicious and opened the paper in front of me. After seeing the contents clearly, she grabbed my clothes and spoke unsteadily. Where did you find this thing? I saw that she was in a bad state, with a panic on her face, and asked him, is there something wrong? Jo Meng Huan seemed not to hear, and tugged on my clothes, staring at me and yelling, tell me, where did you find it? I saw that she was emotionally unstable, so I didn't dare to provoke her, so I hurriedly said, tucked between your high school English books. I saw it from the corner of my eye. She pulled out her high school English and rummaged around frantically, finally stopping at the last page of the book. She stared at the writing on it in a daze. I curled my lips. After setting the trap for so long, you finally came online. When I saw this, I asked her cautiously. In fact, it was deliberately irritating. Who is Yan Mingxing? Is he the boy who had a crush on you in high school? Probably, but since the love letter was randomly thrown here, I guess he's not an important person. She didn't want to hear it, but I insisted on emphasizing it in her ears over and over again. Capital I. Wanted her to never forget. That's right. When I was young, I was careless, impulsive and childish. Now that I think about it, I think it's quite ridiculous. She ignored me, but grabbed the English book and cried and laughed. It turns out that he also liked me back then. It turns out that the person he liked was me, not that bitch. I was wrong. I was always wrong. I was wrong. No, it's not me. It's Zhou Fusheng. It's all his fault. It's all his fault. It's all him. Jo Meng Huan abandoned me and ran out of the antique room. I heard Jo Meng Huan's questioning voice coming from outside. Didn't you say that he doesn't like me? Didn't you say that he liked someone else and that's why I wanted to teach him a lesson? But what is this? Look what this is. Zhou Fusheng, why did you lie to me? I heard Zhou Fusheng's cold retort. You proposed the lesson yourself, and an expired love letter doesn't deserve to make you excited. It's really an embarrassment to the Zhou family. Expired love letter. Zhou Fusheng, it was you who told me that he didn't like me. It was you who said he liked that bitch. So I was so obsessed with allowing you to take revenge on him. That's enough. Zhou Fusheng interrupted Jo Meng Huan's hysteria and slapped her. He slapped it on her face. Don't be crazy. Jo Meng Huan was stunned by his slap. She covered half of her cheek and glared at Zhou Fusheng fiercely. I saw Zhou Fusheng opened his mouth to explain, and stretched out his hand he tried to comfort him, but was pushed away by Jo Meng Huan. You will regret it, Zhou Fusheng. You will regret it. After Jo Meng Huan joined the company, their original closeness had a gap due to interests, and now because of a letter, the belated love letter, completely caused a stir. I asked Jo Meng Huan who Yan Mingxing was. Of course it was intentional. Of course I knew who Yan Mingxing was. I also knew why he died early. Even that love letter was imitated by me. The handwriting, stroked by Str. Oak, is written by hand. If Lu Qingjing is the Cinnabon mole that just walked into Jo Meng Huan's eyes, warm and brilliant, then the words and deeds are the white moonlight deep in Jo Meng Huan's heart, cold and noble, not allowed to be blasphemed. But this bottle back then, Beiyu, was what Jo Meng Huan couldn't get. Nothing could compare to the ecstasy that Beiyu Guang had promised herself to do back then. However, this Beiyu Guang died early because of her relatives. As soon as she arrived in heaven, she was dragged into hell. The gap between the two was so big that she acted like crazy just now. But who can blame her? What you have endured now is not even 1/10 of what Minzing endured back then. At least you are still high up and respected by others, instead of falling into the mire and being trampled in the mud and unable to get out. The brother and sister broke up on bad terms that day. Zhou Menghuan ran away from home in anger, and Zhou Fusheng came to me to ask for a divorce at this time. Of course, I couldn't ask for a divorce. I could finally kick away the sewage. But facing him, I still had to act reluctant and pray, I won't divorce. Fusheng, we won't get divorced. You promised me. As long as I fulfill my role as Mrs. Zhou, we can go on. Fusheng, you promised me. I don't want a divorce. Zhou Fusheng shook me off and pulled me away. The hand on his sleeve, regardless of my pain from being thrown to the ground, he stared at me like an ant on the ground that could be crushed to death at any time. I only married you because I wanted you to be obedient enough and look after me. Zhou Menghuan. Now, Zhou Menghuan wants to make trouble with me because of a dead man. I heard that you found that love letter, he said. When I shook my head unwillingly, he leaned down and pulled my hair, pulling my whole body. Bring him to him. Before I can take care of you now, you'd better be obedient. Don't you love me? If you love me, you should fulfill me. If you really love me, then divorce me peacefully. On the day Zhou Fusheng and I divorced, no one from the Zhou family came forward. This family was selfish to the extreme. When they needed me, they could watch Zhou Fusheng marry me with cold eyes. They didn't need me anymore and were not even willing to show false affection on the surface. I should thank Zhou Fusheng for maintaining me. He doesn't care about me at all and can kick me away at any time. Otherwise, if something happens later, I will have to work hard to leave the Zhou family. Zhou Menghuan said that Lu Qingjing is devoted to her. You can't act to be in love with someone. She believes in Lu Qingjing. I have seen Lu Qingjing look at Zhou Meng with a welcoming look. His eyes are full of her doting. Whoever looks at it without saying a word about true love is like me looking at Zhou Fusheng. His eyes are full of love. It was all because of him, for his extremely humble love. Until the divorce, everyone still thought that I was infatuated with Zhou Fusheng. I agreed to the divorce just to fulfill Zhou Fusheng and not to embarrass him. It was a pity. Zhou Menghuan didn't understand. Loving someone can be acted out. I have been acting for so long and no one has noticed anything is wrong. So why does Zhou Menghuan think that Lu Qingjing really loves her for being arrogant and willful, or does he love her for being cold and selfish? It's because she loves her so much and regards human life as nothing. When Zhou Menghuan found out about my divorce with Zhou Fusheng, she felt no guilt. She actually breathed a sigh of relief and said, "That's fine. My brother doesn't really want to marry you after all. I can barely maintain the marriage. You're unfair, you see. She caused me to divorce Zhou Fusheng, and now she still acts like this is fair to me." It's no wonder that back then, she could say without changing her face that I was the one who cheated in the exam, and she acted like she was doing it for me. Okay, I can't bear my misguided expression. If I were not the person involved, and if I didn't already know that the answer above was written by her begging me in advance, I would have thought that I had really cheated. I cheated on the joint entrance examination and was pointed out in public. My reputation was ruined. I would be pointed at by others when I walked on the street. Even the teacher was disappointed with me. I wanted to explain and refute, but Zhou Menghuan blocked me from the beginning. This left me with all my options, and no one believed my explanation. Apart from Yan Mingxing, I actually didn't hate Zhou Menghuan. Although she wantonly spread rumors about non-existent facts, when I was young, I didn't want to get into trouble. I always believed that, it's just that the results of the joint entrance examination are wrong. The college entrance examination will give me justice. I don't want to cause trouble, but she is unwilling to let me go. She even involves Yan Mingxing. Why do I hate Zhou Menghuan and the Zhou family so much? Because they personally killed my family. He is quick in words and deeds. Whenever I think of him, he is the only color in my grey life. He is the only person who believes that I did not cheat. Even though the writing on the note came from my hand, only he will hold my hand. He said firmly, "I believe Meng Ziqing is not that kind of person. Meng Ziking, I haven't heard this name for a long time. Zhou Menghuan called me sister-in-law. Zhou Fusheng said you. The elders of the Zhou family called me eldest daughter-in-law. Only I am smart in words and actions. Call me Meng Ziking. Meng Ziking and Yan Mingxing are two little beasts who depend on each other in the orphanage. When I was ostracized in the orphanage, it was Yan Mingxing who protected me. Yan Mingxing and I were not sent to the orphanage at birth. Yes, people like us who came later are always easily excluded by those who have grown up in the orphanage. When I Street came to the orphanage, I was withdrawn and disdainful of trying to please the people in the orphanage. In order to punish me, the food distributed by the dean, my share, was snatched away by the small group. They fled in all directions. I couldn't take it back at all. Yan Mingxing saw it. He divided his food into two and let half go. If he gave me something to eat but I didn't want to appreciate it, I would throw it on the ground in front of him. He would not be angry at me for being so willful. Instead, he would rub my head and coax me with a smile. I was so hungry that night. No, I got up and sneaked out to drink cold water to satisfy my hunger. When I looked up, a steamed bun was handed to me. Regardless of my temper, I grabbed the steamed bun and ate it hungrily. I glared at him fiercely. He didn't say anything. Just like during the day, he smiled at me the next day. Yan Mingxing was one step ahead. Before those children grabbed my food, he took my food in his hands. Later, after we got to know each other, I asked him why he was so nice to a stranger at the time. He said, that day when I entered the orphanage, my eyes were full of fear, like a restless cub. If his sister were alive, she would be as old as me. My sister, who was smart in speech and behavior, died due to lack of oxygen when she was still in her mother's belly. He was able to survive, but his parents blamed each other and complained about this matter, and finally got divorced. No one wanted to raise him, so he was sent to an orphanage. His words were sharp, his behavior was poor, and he was not good at words. But when it came to Meng Ziking, he could always find reason, and then fought back. He regarded me as his sister and protected me even if he was injured. But for such a good person, he still cannot escape the nightmare of falling into the quagmire. I know why Zhou Menghuan is so sure, no one will believe me, and I also know why she dares to make things worse, because people who come out of the orphanage should be inferior to her, because the director still needs donations from the society to help more people. There are so many children. I am the one who wronged me, and the eldest lady of the Zhou family is happy. There is no more cost-effective business than this. They all covered my mouth and refused to let me defend myself. Only Yan Mingxing did not give up, but there was no surveillance or recording at the time. No one would believe his explanation, but he still explained to everyone that I didn't need to cheat. She had already designed to ruin my reputation. How could Zhou Menghuan allow someone to defend me? She turned her attention to my Minxing. She wanted everything. People turned their backs on me and hated me, instead of letting Yan Mingxing be my only salvation, so she took action against Yan Mingxing. She deliberately misunderstood the relationship between me and Yan Mingxing. In addition, Yan Mingxing's explanation for me was too ambiguous. No one believes that there is nothing between us. Only I understand that Yan Mingxing protects me as his own sister, just like when he was a child. As long as he is around, he will always confront those who bully me. At that time, everyone in the school they became Zhou Meng's welcoming eyes, monitoring every move of Yan Mingxing and I. If we crossed the line even halfway, we would be criticized and criticized. Those were extremely gloomy days. I was like a snake and rat that could not see the light. I also wanted to refute, but every time defeated by their numbers and pretentiousness, they allowed themselves to indulge in their dependence on words and deeds only at night. We walked side by side under the moonlight and agreed on each other's direction. The light of the full moon shone down and fell around him. He was more dazzling than the moon in the sky. I thought I would welcome the light, but the reality is often crueler than imagined. During the days when Yan Mingxing was targeted, Zhou Menghuan could not help but feel sorry for Yan Mingxing. In fact, he was not at all. It's strange, Someone who can't be trampled by pride can either destroy him or indulge in him. Jo Menghuan can't destroy him, so he can only indulge in his determination. Mingxing refuses, but Jo Menghuan's approach is a toss-up between several students, but unfortunately, the Zhou family had a beloved sister named Zhou Fusheng. That night, Yan Mingxing and I made an appointment to run to the future together. We hooked up under the street lamp and promised to be relatives for life, but the car lights that night were too dazzling. His blood was scattered all over the ground in such a remote place. I held him covered in blood, but no matter how I called for help, no one came. I put down his still warm body and called for an ambulance, but they still couldn't save him. Later, Zhou Menghuan called her brother in front of me. On the loudspeaker, I listened to his brother casually say, "It seems it's because he's so unlucky that he can't afford his sister's love. The passing of a life in their eyes only deserves the words lucky." I heard Zhou Menghuan act coquettishly at her brother. "Isn't it all the fault of this bitch Meng Ziqing? If she had to pester Yan Mingxing, how could I be willing to do anything to him?" She walked toward me step by step, raised my chin, and there was a look of arrogance in her eyes. "If Yan Mingxing hadn't been ignorant, I would have insisted on getting involved with you. How could I be willing to do something to him? I originally wanted to teach him a lesson, but who asked him to have to protect you from disaster? Trash is trash, it will only drag others down. Without you, how could Yan Mingxing die then?" For a moment, the palms of my hands were pricked by nails. I stared at Zhou Menghuan's leaving figure fiercely. I wanted to take revenge and pay for my whole life. I also wanted them to be ruined and their lives would be worse than death. I secretly snooped on Zhou Menghuan's life, getting closer to her step by step, and then I held her in my arms and eliminated her wariness to the greatest extent. I married into the Zhou family as I wished, clumsily trying to please the Zhou family, sowing discord, and distracting their seemingly indestructible family ties. I knew Zhou Menghuan's preferences, so I arranged for Lu Qingjing to be completely attracted to Zhou Mengjing. The perfect lover that Huan likes to cultivate has tied her heart. I know what Zhou Menghuan was thinking when he was young. I imitated Yan Mingxing's handwriting, and I completely broke up the Zhou brothers and sisters. Next, we should see what Lu Qingjing's pillow wind can blow out. After all, life is really unfair. If the Zhou family brothers and sisters want the lives of ants like us, they only need to make a phone call and throw out a sum of money. But for little people like us to want the Zhou family to pay the price, it takes more than a dozen calculations. Years ago, I moved forward cautiously. Fortunately, all this is almost over. During these years in the Zhou family, I couldn't get in touch with the core of the Zhou family, but Zhou Menghuan could. So I secretly coaxed Zhou Menghuan to help me get the Zhou family's tax evasion, evidence of using inferior building materials and even causing deaths. If these things are released now, they will not be able to move the bones of the Zhou family. But if they are released after Zhou Menghuan and Zhou Fusheng have completely defeated the Zhou family's wealth in internal fighting, then it will break the camel's back. The last straw after Zhou Menghuan entered the company, she made it clear that she wanted to go against Zhou Fusheng. She vetoed all the decisions made by Zhou Fusheng and encouraged other shareholders to oppose them. However, Zhou Menghuan was young after all, and how could she control the internal relations of the company in the short term? There is no doubt that she lost Zhou Menghuan in this confrontation, and she will make progress after suffering losses. So when she faced Zhou Fusheng again, she chose to be patient, but at the last moment, she changed Zhou Fusheng's bid. According to the data, Zhou Fusheng's months of hard work were in vain, and even the company was affected. It was impossible for the Zhou family to watch the two brothers and sisters fighting like this, and come out to stop it in time. If it had been earlier, they might have been able to turn the two of them into enemies. It's a pity. They reacted too late. When the Zhou brothers and sisters were fighting the most fiercely, I told Zhou Fusheng that Lu Qingjing and Zhou Menghuan were not separated. "Fusheng, can we remarry? Lu Qingjing can reunite with Menghuan, why can't we? I don't want to give up on you, Fusheng, I love you so much." Zhou Fusheng naturally pushed me away in disgust. and the presence of Lu Qingjing made him think of the same method as before. He wanted Lu Qingjing's life to suppress Zhou Menghuan. By the time Zhou Menghuan got the news, Lu Qingjing was gone. Just like Yan Mingxing before, he had completely disappeared from the world. This time, she didn't even see Lu Qingjing for the last time. My move of arranging Lu Qingjing to appear next to Zhou Menghuan finally worked. She became the fatal blow that destroyed Zhou Menghuan's belief. Because her brother lost her lover twice in a row, Zhou Menghuan became obsessed with dreams. She didn't even care about the Zhou family's family business. It was revealed that the Zhou family's industry was under construction. There have been many deaths at the scene due to improper protection. I am not surprised at all that she behaves like a lunatic. People who smell too much potions are always a little unusual. Zhou Menghuan likes Lily. Everyone in the Zhou family knows that I will be with her every day. Putting a bouquet of fresh lilies in the room was my trick to support Zhou Menghuan, and it was also my way to please Zhou Fusheng. But they didn't know that the lilies I put in Zhou Menghuan's room every day was sprinkled with a potion that would make people increasingly irritable. Zhou Menghuan fell asleep listening to it every day. Later Zhou Menghuan moved out of Zhao's house, and Lu Qingjing took over the follow-up affairs. The daily lily never stopped. This romance in Zhou Menghuan's eyes became her aphrodisiac. Zhou Menghuan broke the news. One stone stirred up 1,000 waves. Online public opinion skyrocketed, and relevant units intervened in the investigation. How dare those who had cooperated with the Zhou family in the past get involved in this muddy water, and they all distanced themselves from the Zhou family. The shopping mall is like a battlefield. Since the Zhou family is now negative in the past, they couldn't stand their opponents, so they naturally wanted to step the Zhou family into the mud. If they couldn't, they would chew off a bone. But this time, Zhou Menghuan was found to have irritability, and the Zhou family seemed to be disappointed. When hope arrived, she hurriedly broke the news. The strong man cut off his wrist and pushed his daughter out to protect the entire Zhou family. How could this be done? I finally disturbed a pool of water. How can I let them survive safely? So I promptly broke the news about the Zhou family's repeated use of illegal building materials, and even compiled the evidence and sent it to the relevant units. The evil done by the Zhou family must be concealed. Can't stand it anymore. As soon as the news of the deaths and the use of illegal building materials in Zhao's construction protection zone came out, Zhao's credibility completely disappeared. Coupled with the large amount of tax evasion, the once prosperous Zhou family fell apart. The court seized Zhao's property and used it to the debt was auctioned off, and the Zhou family was saddled with huge debts. Zhou Menghuan was sent to a mental hospital. This time, no one protected her. I stood in the crowd and watched coldly as she cried and fussed. Finally, she was dragged in. The last time she saw me in the hospital, Zhou Menghuan saw me. She had become an abandoned child of the Zhou family. She still thought that I could save her. She yelled at me, bit the arm of the person holding her, broke away and ran towards me. But on the way, I was stopped again. I walked up to her, and before she could speak, I whispered in her ear, "Can you really not remember me? I am Meng Ziqing, the bitch in your mouth." Meng Ziqing. Zhou Menghuan raised her head suddenly. The hope in her eyes was soaked with hatred. She stared at me fiercely, wishing to bite off a piece of meat from my body, but I just smiled at her, just like when she succeeded in her prank. "I forgot to tell you. The love letter you thought was written by me, the love letter that caused you to completely break up with Zhou Fusheng was written by the person you hate the most." I saw Zhou Menghuan's desperate and angry unwillingness. I smiled at her very sweetly. If nothing unexpected happens, she will live in a mental hospital her whole life, so how can I care about her hatred? Zhou Fusheng fell from the favored son of heaven to a migrant worker burdened with debts overnight, and became him the ordinary person he once looked down upon the most. No, he is not even an ordinary person. Ordinary people at least live innocently and openly. I saw him bowing his head in front of others in order to survive, just like the people he once looked down upon. I saw those who had been bullied by him, standing in front of him, waving small amounts of money that he once despised, and yelling at him, but he could only lick his face and suffer the violence because of my disapproval. To control violence, but sometimes you have to admit that this kind of result is the most satisfying. Joe Fushing, you think that money can do anything. Without money, you should be as humble as an ant. Now, Jay, just enjoy those years of money. The backlash for you, this is just the beginning. Even if he is as humble as a dog now, he is still alive and living freely. I saw him adapt to today's life step by step, and even began to adjust his psychology, and I started to take revenge on him again. I gave the police the recording of him deliberately killing Zan Minxing during the dispute with Joe Menghuan that day. My Yan Minxing is gone. Every day you live, you pray for my Yan Minxing. Since you are praying for blessings, you should naturally find a quiet place. By the way, you can wash away all your sins. Prison is a good place. Joe Fushing was sentenced to death for intentional homicide and deprived of political rights for life. On the day the court ruled, against the light, I saw Lu Qingjing walking toward me holding a bouquet of blooming lilies. Come, when you are almost in front of me, throw the lilies into the trash can. That bunch of sinful lilies no longer needs to bloom, because the guilty villains have been punished for their words and deeds. You see, I have sought justice for you. Why was Lu Qingjing willing to help me? Because he was a student sponsored by me. I admit that I had an ulterior motive in donating to him in the first place. I took a fancy to the stubbornness in his eyebrows that was similar to Yan Minxing. I approached him and gave him I didn't force him to reveal his purpose. I would help him even if he didn't want to, but he promised me. The trust and paranoia in the young man's eyes made my heart tremble. I swore that I would protect him, even if I exposed myself in the end. I will not let Lu Qingjing follow in the footsteps of Yan Minxing. After Joe Menghuan and Joe Fushing had a falling out over Yan Min's love letter, and I told Joe Fushing that Lu Qingjing had not left Joe Menghuan, I thought that Joe Fushing would use radical methods to hurt Lu Qingjing's luck. For so many years, the only method Joe Fushing could think of was to pay for murder. Unfortunately, during that time Lu Qingjing almost stayed behind closed doors. The only chance he had was in an alley late at night. Lu Qingjing went out to buy a paintbrush. Under the dim light, no one suspected it. Was it Lu Qingjing who was lying there? Because the next moment, the piercing alarm sounded. Afterwards, I was annoyed by Lu Qingjing's nonsense. If it were later, if those people came forward to confirm again, did he know that he really would? The desperate Lu Qingjing threw away the paintbrush, which was his random hobby to confuse Joe Menghuan. I promised my sister that I would accompany her to watch them suffer the consequences. They haven't received their retribution yet. How can anything happen to me? Fortunately, our bet was successful. Darkness cannot cover the light. There may be thorns along the way, and there may be layers of fog ahead, but please firmly believe that there is dawn at the end of the night.